You can't manage all of this forever, Dad. My daughter set her coffee cup down on the dining room table and avoided my eyes. My son-in-law smirked. You should be grateful someone still wants to help. This estate is too much for a man your age. I tightened my grip on the fork. What do you mean? I mean you're forgetting things. One wrong signature, and everything could disappear. My daughter nodded. That night, my granddaughter hugged me and whispered, Grandpa, don't trust them. 3 weeks later, I discovered my obituary had already been written. Thank you for being here. Before we begin, please drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I read every one, and your presence here matters. Quick note, this story includes some fictionalized elements added to highlight the lesson. What stays with you, the message, is what truly matters. The phone rang at exactly 5:47 a.m., 12 minutes after I opened the boatyard, and I knew immediately something was wrong. Bankers don't call at dawn unless the money is already gone. I still touched the boat the way Harriet taught me fingertips, first feeling for the grain. At 72, I'd been opening this place at 5:30 every morning since 1977, 45 years of the same ritual. Unlock the workshop door, walk to the unfinished cedar hull in the center bay, run my weathered hands along the planks. The Savannah River mist would rise around me, mixing with sawdust and varnish. And for those first 17 minutes before the world woke up, I could still feel her presence in the wood. Harriet had been gone 2 years, taken by a stroke so sudden, I sometimes still expected to see her walking down the dock with 2 cups of coffee and that smile that made 43 years of marriage feel like borrowed time. She'd understood what most people never learned: good boats aren't rushed. You build them one plank at a time, checking every joint, trusting the process, even when you can't see the finished shape yet. That morning, I just finished running my hand along the starboard curve when my phone started buzzing in my jacket pocket. The sound cut through the dawn silence like a saw blade hitting a nail. I pulled it out. Savannah Trust Bank, Dexter Saxon. Dexter had managed my private accounts for 12 years, and I'd never heard him call before 8 o'clock. Not once. I answered. Merle, he said, and I recognized that tone immediately, the careful, measured cadence of a banker delivering bad news about your own money. I'm sorry to call so early. I wanted to speak to you before filing the official report. My chest tightened. What report? Can you talk privately? I looked around the empty boatyard. River mist hung low over the water, clinging to the dock like it knew something I didn't. Harriet used to say the river could sense when trouble was coming. That morning, I understood what she meant. I'm alone, I said. What happened? Dexter exhaled slowly. There was suspicious activity on your account yesterday. The trust account, the one established in Harriet's name. I froze. That account was sacred. We'd set it up together 20 years ago, structured it carefully with lawyers and trustees and protections. It held the core of everything we'd built: the boatyard, the house, the investments that would secure our family's future long after we were gone. What kind of activity? I asked. I heard papers rustling on his end. Multiple login attempts between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. yesterday. Someone accessed the account management portal using your credentials. They attempted to initiate several transactions, including a beneficiary change request. The workshop suddenly felt cold, despite the Georgia humidity. A beneficiary change? Yes. The attempt was flagged by our fraud detection system and automatically blocked. But Merle, his voice dropped lower. Whoever did this had your login information. They knew the account number, the security questions, the authentication protocols. They knew which account to target. My mind raced. How many people have those credentials? Another pause. Longer this time. 3, Dexter finally said. You, Mrs. Whitfield, as trustee, and anyone you've shared them with. I checked the IP address. The attempt originated from Savannah. Not your home address, not the boatyard, not Mrs. Whitfield's office. somewhere else local. I leaned against the workbench, gripping the edge hard enough that old sawdust pressed into my palm. Someone in Savannah. Someone who'd been close enough to get my banking passwords. Someone who knew about Harriet's trust. The dinners flashed through my mind. Family gatherings at the big house on Bull Street. The Georgian mansion Harriet and I had restored together over 30 years. Marlene and her husband Bryce visiting more often lately. Questions about finances that seemed casual at the time. Concerns about whether I was managing okay on my own. Who had I trusted with those numbers? The question hung in the river mist. Who had sat at my dinner table, smiled at my stories about boat building and Harriet's garden, and memorized the architecture of my financial life? Merle? Dexter's voice pulled me back. Are you there? I'm here. I need to freeze the account pending investigation. Standard protocol. But you should think carefully about who might have had access to your information. Not just the passwords, I mean someone who understood the account structure well enough to know that changing the beneficiary was the key move. That detail landed like a hammer. Changing the beneficiary wasn't random. It was strategic. It meant someone understood exactly how the trust worked, understood that the beneficiary designation was the gateway to everything. How long will the freeze take? I asked. It's already done. I flagged it last night as soon as the attempts were blocked. But we'll need to file a formal incident report by end of business today, and that means law enforcement will likely get involved. If this was identity theft, we treat it seriously. Identity theft, I repeated. The word sounded wrong, too clinical, too distant. This wasn't some stranger in another state running a phishing scam. This was someone local. Someone who knew me. I'll need you to come in this week, Dexter continued. Review the security logs, update your credentials, maybe add additional authentication layers. And Merle, be careful who you discuss this with. If someone's targeting your accounts, you don't want to tip them off that we've caught it. Understood. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I know this isn't what you needed. After he hung up, I stood in the boatyard office holding the dead phone, watching the sun finally break through the Savannah River mist. The cedar hull sat in the center bay, half-finished, patient. Harriet had taught me that good things take time, that you don't rush the important work. But someone I knew, someone close enough to have my banking passwords, had tried to steal the trust we'd built over 43 years of marriage. They'd targeted the account in my dead wife's name, and they'd done it from somewhere in this city. Maybe from somewhere I'd invited them. I needed to go home. Needed to look at that trust document again, the one Opal had filed in Harriet's study. Needed to understand what they were really after. Because if someone was willing to commit fraud to change a beneficiary, they weren't planning to stop there. I went straight to Harriet's study when I got home, the one room I hadn't changed in 2 years, and spread the trust documents across her desk like evidence at a crime scene. The afternoon light came through the stained glass windows, the way it always had, throwing patches of gold and amber across the mahogany desk. Harriet had spent 30 years in this room, managing the books for the boatyard, corresponding with lawyers, building the architecture of our financial life while I built boats. I'd left everything exactly as she'd arranged it, fountain pens in the jade holder, reading glasses on the blotter, her handwriting still visible on the calendar from 2 Februaries ago. I pulled out the trust document first. 38 pages of legal language that Opal Whitfield had helped us draft 20 years earlier. I'd signed it without reading every clause back then, trusting Harriet's judgment. Now I read every word. The structure revealed itself slowly, carefully, like the grain in a piece of wood. The trust held everything: the Georgian mansion on Bull Street, worth $3.8 million, the boatyard, and 4.2 acres of Savannah riverfront, appraised at $2.7 million, investment accounts, totaling $1.5 million. $8.2 million total, built over 43 years of marriage. But here was the trap Harriet had built. The trust couldn't be sold while I lived. It couldn't be transferred or liquidated. It could only pass to designated beneficiaries upon my death, provided I maintained what the document called demonstrable family relationships up until the end. I read that clause 3 times. Demonstrable family relationships. Active contact. Evidence of ongoing care and involvement. If those relationships were severed, if I was declared incompetent, if I was isolated, if someone could prove I'd become estranged from family, the trust's protections evaporated. It could be challenged, restructured, broken. Harriet had been smarter than both of us realized. She'd built a fortress designed to protect our assets from predators and gold diggers. But like any fortress, it had a weakness, me. I was the lock. Remove me or break me, and the wealth flowed to whoever controlled the beneficiary designation. Someone had tried to change that designation yesterday, which meant someone had already decided I was the problem. I sat back in Harriet's chair watching the afternoon light shift across her desk. She used to say she married me because I built things that lasted boats, businesses, a life. She never told me she'd built something too, a legal cage that would keep me safe or trap me forever, depending on who held the key. That was 2 weeks ago. Tonight, my daughter came to dinner for the first time in 3 weeks. Marlene Perry Travers walked through the front door at 42, looking polished as a magazine cover, gray silk blouse, pearl earrings. Harriet had given her that professional smile she'd perfected working in pharmaceutical sales. But she wouldn't meet my eyes the way she used to when she was 7 and had broken something precious. "Hi, Dad," she said, kissing my cheek. The gesture felt rehearsed. Bryce Travers followed her inside, 49 years old, with a real estate lawyer's easy confidence and a handshake that lasted exactly 1 second too long. He'd been married to my daughter for 3 years, and tonight was the first time I noticed how he surveyed the entry hall, like he was calculating square footage. "Merle," he said warmly, "house looks great. You're maintaining it well on your own." "On your own." The phrase hung in the air. Lark came in last, 11 years old, with Harriet's dark eyes and her mother's sharp intelligence. She carried a backpack covered in book club stickers and hugged me properly the way kids do when they actually mean it. "Hi, Grandpa," she whispered. "I missed you." We ate in the formal dining room under the crystal chandelier Harriet had restored. I'd made pot roast the way she'd taught me, and for the first 40 minutes the conversation stayed safe. Lark's school project on coastal ecosystems, Marlene's new sales territory, the unusually warm March weather. Then Bryce leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Merle," he said casually, "I've been meaning to ask, have you ever considered expanding the marina side of the boatyard? I was looking at some recent sales data, and that riverfront footage could be worth, well, significantly more than boats." I set down my fork. "The boatyard's not for sale." "Oh, I know." He raised both hands. "I'm just saying, from a pure asset management perspective, you're sitting on property that could generate serious revenue if it was developed properly. Marina Slips may be a small commercial dock restaurant space. It's a boatyard," I said. "It's been a boatyard since 1977. Lark kicked my shin under the table, once sharp, deliberate. I looked at her. Her eyes met mine for half a second, warning. Marlene finally spoke. "Bryce is just trying to help Dad. You're managing a lot on your own. We worry." "We plural, strategic." "I'm managing fine," I said. "When does a family dinner stop being family? When your son-in-law asks about property values instead of your health. When your daughter won't meet your eyes. When your granddaughter has to warn you with her shoe under the table." They left at 8:30. Bryce shook my hand again. Marlene kissed my cheek with that rehearsed precision, and Lark hugged me while her parents walked toward the car. "Grandpa," she whispered, her breath warm against my shoulder. "Dad always talks on the phone in the car before he comes inside. Tonight I heard him. He said your name. Twice." She pulled back, eyes serious. "Be careful," she said. Then she ran to catch up with her parents before they noticed she'd lingered. I stood in the doorway, watching Bryce's Mercedes disappear down the oak-lined drive, Lark's words echoing in my head. My son-in-law had been talking about me before every visit, preparing, calculating, performing the role of concerned family while gathering intelligence about property values and my ability to manage a loan. The bank breach wasn't random. It wasn't finished. And my daughter, the girl I'd taught to build model boats in this same house 42 years ago, either didn't know what her husband was planning, or she'd already chosen which side of the fortress walls she'd stand on. I needed to talk to someone who understood how predators operated. Someone who'd spent 40 years investigating fraud and pattern behavior. I needed my brother Alvin. When your 78-year-old brother drives 2 hours from Charleston and arrives at your door past midnight with a banker's box full of files, you don't ask if the news is bad. You ask how bad. Alvin Lockwood stood on my back porch in the April darkness 30 years as an insurance fraud investigator, behind him, and those patient, methodical eyes that meant he'd found something worse than I'd imagined. He set the box down on the wrought iron table where Harriet used to serve iced tea in summer. "I need coffee," he said, "and you need to sit down." I made a pot while he unpacked files. When I came back outside, the porch table looked like a crime scene photographs. Financial records, newspaper clippings, handwritten timelines spanning 14 months. 14 months, I said, staring at the dates. "I called you last week." Alvin looked up, and something in his expression made my chest tighten. "I've been looking into Bryce Travers since the week after he married Marlene," he said quietly. "Something about him felt rehearsed. The way he moved through your house during the reception. The questions he asked about the boatyard. I've seen that pattern before in fraud cases, where the perpetrator studies the target, first learns the layout plans, the extraction." I sat down slowly. "You've been investigating my son-in-law for over a year and didn't tell me. I was hoping I was wrong." He pulled out a photograph. "Macon, Georgia, 2 years before he met Marlene. This is Margaret Sutherland, daughter of Arthur Sutherland, who owned 43 acres of farmland with mineral rights worth about $6 million. The woman in the photo looked young, polished, smiling next to a man I recognized as a younger version of Bryce. They were engaged," Alvin continued, "for 8 months, right up until the old man refused to transfer the mineral rights into a joint trust. Engagement ended 2 weeks later. Bryce moved to Atlanta, then to Savannah, where he met your daughter at a pharmaceutical conference." I stared at the photograph. The same easy smile, the same confident posture. "He's done this before," I said. "There's more." Alvin spread financial documents across the table. Atlanta 2019, Bryce partnered with a development firm on a commercial real estate deal. Put up collateral he didn't actually own, forged property assessments. The deal collapsed. He walked away owing $2.3 million to investors who are still trying to collect. The numbers blurred in front of me. $2.3 million in debt. My estate worth over $8 million. The math was simple and sickening. "The question that matters," Alvin said, leaning forward, "is whether Marlene knows what she married. Is she the mark or the accomplice? I'd taught Marlene to tie her shoes when she was 4, held her hand through Harriet's funeral. 2 years ago, walked her down the aisle when she married Bryce 3 years back. Now my brother was asking me if my daughter was plotting to destroy me, and I didn't have an answer. "I don't know," I finally said. "She wouldn't look at me during dinner. But that could be guilt, or fear, or she's a better actor than we want to believe." Alvin's voice was gentle but firm. "I need you to consider both possibilities, little brother, because what comes next depends on which one is true." 3 days later, I sat across from Opal Whitfield in her Bull Street law office, Harriet's photograph still on her desk after 2 years. At 68, Opal still practiced estate law with the precision of someone who'd watched too many families destroy themselves over money. She'd been Harriet's closest friend for 40 years and co-trustee of our estate. She wasn't smiling. "I've been going through the trust structure since you called," she said, spreading documents across the mahogany desk. "Harriet and I designed it to be impenetrable. It requires both our signatures to transfer or liquidate. But there's one vulnerability we couldn't eliminate. She pushed a legal document toward me. A court-appointed conservator, she continued. If you're declared legally incompetent, a judge can override both trustees and appoint someone to manage your affairs. That person would have full access and control. My hands felt cold. Declare me incompetent. Exactly. Opal pulled another file from her briefcase. I found this filing yesterday. I have a colleague who monitors certain court activities as a professional courtesy. This appeared 3 weeks ago. She opened the file. The letterhead read, Superior Court of Chatham County. The date was stamped 3 weeks earlier, right around the time of the dinner, where Lark had kicked my shin under the table, where Bryce had asked about marina expansion values, where Marlene wouldn't meet my eyes. Petition for appointment of forensic psychological evaluation. Opal read. Petitioner Bryce Travers, concerned son-in-law. Subject Merle Lockwood, age 72, showing signs of cognitive decline and financial mismanagement. Recommended evaluator Dr. Helena Crane. She looked up. Dr. Helena Crane specializes in elder competency evaluations. She's expensive, which means Bryce is serious about building this case. And this filing is dated before the bank breach you told me about. They're not improvising, Merle. This is choreographed. How do you prove you're sane to a system designed to protect the elderly from themselves? How do you fight a psychologist's report when fighting it makes you look paranoid? What evidence would she need? I asked. Documented incidents, memory lapses, confusion, poor decision-making, witness statements from family members expressing concern. Opal's voice was clinical, but her eyes were furious. Every conversation you've had with them since this filing, every dinner, every phone call, every time you forgot where you put your keys, they've been documenting it. The dinner replayed in my mind. Bryce's casual questions about property values. Marlene's rehearsed concern about me managing a loan. The way they'd exchanged glances when I couldn't immediately remember the name of Lark's school project. Evidence gathering, all of it. They filed 3 weeks ago, I said slowly. Which means every interaction since then has been building the case to declare you incompetent, Opal finished. Bryce decided you were worth more dead than alive, and he hired an expert to make it legal. She closed the file and met my eyes across Harriet's photograph, with 40 years of legal expertise in her expression. We need to know if he's done this before, she said. If there are other victims, other families, because if we can prove pattern behavior, we can stop him before he gets near a courtroom. I thought of Alvin's files, the engagement in Macon, the debts in Atlanta. My brother's already looking, I said, and I think we're going to find more than we want to. Alvin found Bryce's former accountant in a harbor bar 3 days after Opal's warning, and Irving Kemp had been waiting for someone like my brother to walk through that door for 18 months. Alvin called me from the parking lot afterward, voice low and careful. He kept everything, Alvin said. USB drive, shell company files, money transfers, emails. He's been sitting on it since Bryce cheated him. How much did Bryce take? I asked. $180,000. Convinced Irving to set up offshore accounts for a development deal, then cut him out and kept the money. Irving's smart enough to know he can't go to the police without implicating himself, so he kept copies of everything as insurance. I leaned against the boatyard wall watching the Savannah River move past in the late afternoon light. Is he willing to testify? Better than that. He wants to help. Alvin told me the rest while I listened. Irving Kemp at 58, with an accountant's careful hands and the bitter eyes of a man who'd been cheated by someone who thought he was too stupid to keep receipts. They'd met in a secluded corner booth of the harbor bar, jazz music, drowning their conversation, while Irving laid out 18 months of documentation. He placed the USB on the table, Alvin said, and told me, I'm not a good person, Mr. Lockwood. I helped him set up half these accounts, but I draw the line at helping someone kill an old man for his house. I closed my eyes. Irving Kemp wasn't innocent. He'd helped Bryce commit fraud, had profited from it until Bryce turned on him. But somewhere in that collaboration, he'd found a line he wouldn't cross. "Did you take the USB?" I asked. "No." Alvin's voice held that strategic patience I recognized from his investigator days. "I told him to keep it safe. I'd call him when we needed it, and when I did, he'd hand it to exactly who I told him, not the police, not a lawyer." He agreed. "Why not take it now?" "Because right now, Bryce doesn't know Irving's a threat. The USB stays hidden. Irving stays invisible. And when the time comes when Bryce thinks he's won, that evidence appears exactly where it'll do the most damage." I understood. This wasn't about stopping Bryce. This was about destroying him completely publicly, with the kind of precision that left no room for appeals or second chances. "How long do we have?" I asked. "Until he moves on the incompetency case. Once that psychologist files her report, the clock starts. We need to be ready. You spend 72 years building things, boats, businesses, trust, and then 1 week you learn to build traps instead. The tools are different, but the patience is the same." 2 weeks later, I stood in Harriet's study with Opal watching a security specialist named Marcus install the 7th camera in the air vent above the doorframe. "He'll find the first 2 within a week," Opal said quietly. "Maybe less if he's thorough." "That's the point," I said. The first decoy camera went in the living room bookshelf, tucked behind a row of Harriet's gardening books, with a small red light, blinking obvious as a warning beacon. The second decoy, I placed myself in the dining room, mounted on the crown molding, where anyone searching would spot it if they looked up. "These are intentional," I explained to Marcus. "He needs to find them. He needs to feel clever." Marcus nodded with the understanding of someone who'd done corporate security for 20 years. The real cameras went into places no one would think to search: smoke detectors, electrical outlets, the antique mantelpiece clock that had watched 3 generations of Lockwoods, a false screwhead in the study doorframe inside the thermostat, housing behind the decorative grate in the hallway. 7 cameras, Marcus said, handing me the laptop. "All wireless, all encrypted, all recording to cloud storage he can't access even if he finds the equipment. Battery backup in case he cuts power. You'll have eyes on every room that matters." After Marcus left, Opal and I sat in the study while she walked me through the financial restructuring. "The second trust is in my name only," she explained, showing me documents I'd signed 3 days earlier. 60% of your liquid assets, $4.92 million. It doesn't appear on any statement Bryce has ever seen. As far as he knows, it vanished. And the decoy account, she pulled up a bank statement on her laptop, shows a balance of $4.2 million, enough to make him think he's found the prize, enough to make him confident. The account has legitimate credentials, legitimate history, but the moment he tries to access it, we'll know. The bank will flag it, and we'll have proof of attempted theft. I studied the screen. $4.2 million sitting there like bait in a trap designed to look like carelessness. "He'll think I'm an old man who doesn't understand how to hide money properly," I said. "Exactly." Opal's smile was sharp as a legal brief. "You want to know the difference between a good trap and a great one. A good trap catches your enemy. A great trap makes your enemy think they've escaped." That night I sat in Harriet's study watching 7 camera feeds on the laptop Opal had configured. Living room, dining room, study, master bedroom, kitchen, front hallway, back porch. Every angle covered, every conversation captured. The 2 decoy cameras blinked their obvious red lights in rooms Bryce would search first. He'd find them within a week, I was certain of that. He'd disable them, remove them, maybe even destroy them to send a message. And he'd feel clever and safe. He'd never see the real cameras recording everything from the air vents and smoke detectors. He'd never know that every word, every gesture, every moment of conspiracy was being documented with the same methodical patience Harriet had taught me when we built the boatyard together 45 years ago. 1 plank at a time, 1 day at a time, Trust the process even when you can't see the finished shape. I looked at Harriet's photograph on the desk. She would have hated that it came to this, that our daughter's husband had turned our home into a battlefield. But she would have understood why I was fighting. She'd built the legal fortress. I was building the trap inside it. The camera feeds glowed in the darkness of the study. 7 windows into my own home, waiting to catch the people who thought they could steal it. "Come on," I whispered to the empty room to Bryce, driving home from wherever he'd been that night. To the conspiracy I could feel tightening around me like a noose. "Come on. I'm more prepared than you think." The last innocent Sunday I spent with my granddaughter was in late May, 3 weeks after I'd installed the cameras, when I still believed I could protect her from knowing what her parents had become. Bryce found the first decoy camera on Tuesday. I watched him disable it on the real cameras, looking pleased with himself as he pocketed the device like a trophy. He never looked up at the air vents or noticed the false screw heads. By Sunday, I'd convinced myself Lark was safe because she was innocent. I was wrong. She'd come to stay the weekend while Marlene and Bryce attended some conference in Atlanta. Lark brought her 6th grade homework and the family tablet, spreading everything across the living room coffee table while I read the Sunday paper by the window. The afternoon light came through the stained glass, throwing patches of amber across the Persian rug. Lark's pencil scratched against her math worksheet. The house felt peaceful in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel in months. Then I heard Bryce's voice, not from the hallway, from the tablet on Lark's lap. My granddaughter went completely still, her pencil frozen mid-equation, her face blank with the particular emptiness that comes right before understanding crashes in. The voice continued, tinny but clear. "Sign it and send it right away, Marlene. We're on a timeline here." Marlene's response came immediately. "I know. Once it's filed, the old man won't have time to understand what's happening. Dr. Crane said the evaluation takes 6 weeks minimum. But if we submit the petition this week, we can have the conservatorship hearing before he realizes what the documents mean." "Good. And you're sure about the account access?" "Positive. Once the court declares him incompetent, we can petition to replace Opal. Then it's just a matter of—" Lark pressed the screen. The voices stopped. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was dense, heavy, the kind of quiet that happens when everything you believed about the world breaks apart at once. She didn't move for 3 minutes. I counted every second on the grandfather clock in the corner. The same clock that had marked time for 3 generations of Lockwoods. The same clock that now ticked through this moment when an 11-year-old girl learned her mother was plotting to destroy her grandfather. There's a particular kind of silence that happens when a child realizes their parents aren't heroes. It's not loud grief or angry questions. It's the quiet sound of a worldview collapsing brick by careful brick until nothing's left but the truth. I set down my newspaper, watching Lark's face for some sign of what she needed. Comfort. Explanation. Permission to pretend she hadn't heard. She gave me none of those openings. Instead, she closed the tablet with deliberate precision, set it on the coffee table, and stood up. Her homework stayed scattered across the rug. The pencil rolled off her worksheet and came to rest against the table leg. She walked across the room to where I sat by the window, not running, not crying, just walking with the measured steps of someone who'd decided something important and was carrying it through no matter how much it hurt. When she reached my chair, she climbed onto my lap, the way she used to when she was 4 years old, and the world still made sense. She wrapped her arms around my neck and pressed her face against my shoulder. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She didn't say a single word. She just held on, her small body trembling against my chest, with the effort of being brave when everything familiar was breaking apart around her. I wrapped my arms around her and felt that trembling, not fear I understood after a moment, but rage. The kind of fierce, wordless fury that comes when someone you love betrays someone else you love, and you're too young to know what to do with that anger, except hold it inside and refuse to let it win. What do you say to an 11-year-old who just discovered her mother is plotting against her grandfather? What words exist for the moment when childhood ends, not gradually but instantly, in the 3 minutes it takes to listen to a voice memo accidentally left on a family tablet? I didn't try to find those words. Instead, I held my granddaughter in the afternoon light and let her shake with the weight of knowledge she should never have had to carry. Finally, after minutes that felt like hours, she pulled back just enough to look at me. Her eyes were dry. Her face was calm. But something in her expression had changed, something fundamental and irreversible. "You know," she whispered, not a question, a statement. "I know," I said. "They're trying to take the house." "Yes." "They're lying about you being sick." "Yes." She nodded once, processing, accepting. Then she put her head back on my shoulder and whispered 4 words that broke my heart and rebuilt it simultaneously. "What do we do?" "We." "Not you, we." She hadn't come to me for comfort. She'd come to tell me she was choosing sides. We sat there as the afternoon light shifted across the living room floor. An old man and a child who'd just chosen to become soldiers, neither of us speaking, because there was nothing to say that could make it better. I felt her trembling against my chest, not from fear anymore, but from the sheer effort of deciding to be brave, when being brave meant accepting that your mother had stopped being your mother somewhere along the way. I thought about the cameras recording everything, about Alvin's files, about Irving's USB drive waiting, about Opal's legal strategies and the trap we'd built inside my own home. And I thought, we've got another soldier now, the smallest and the bravest of us all. But first, I needed to know if Marlene was the general of this conspiracy or just another victim of the man she'd married. I needed to look my daughter in the eye and know which one I was fighting. 3 weeks after Lark's silent warning, my daughter came to see me alone for the first time since her wedding, and I knew from the way she wouldn't meet my eyes that I was about to lose her completely. It was a June morning, early enough that the heat hadn't settled into the kitchen yet. Marlene stood by the counter where Harriet used to make coffee, looking thinner than I'd seen her in years, with worried eyes that wouldn't quite focus on my face. "You wanted to talk," I said, pouring her a cup. She took it but didn't drink, just held it between her hands like she needed something to grip. "I'm worried about you, Dad," she said, and her voice had that careful, therapeutic tone I'd heard before. "You've been acting different lately, paranoid. Bryce thinks maybe you should see someone, a doctor, just to make sure everything's okay." I set down my own cup slowly. "Marlene, what happened to the trust account Dexter called me in March? Said someone tried to change the beneficiary, someone with access to my passwords." Her face went blank for half a second, the kind of blank that comes before a practiced response. "You're worrying too much, Dad," she said, meeting my eyes for the first time, but with none of the warmth I remembered. "Bryce just wants to help you manage your assets more effectively. You're not getting any younger. These things get complicated, and we don't want you to—" "To what?" I interrupted. "To notice when someone's stealing from me." "Stealing?" She laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was the sound of someone performing disbelief. "Dad, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Seeing conspiracies where there's just family trying to help. Maybe Dr. Crane was right." "Dr. Crane." She'd said the name so casually, confirming what Opal had discovered in the court records. "You know about Dr. Crane," I said quietly. Something flickered across her face. Not guilt, not shame, just calculation. "Bryce mentioned you might need an evaluation," she said. "For your own protection. The house is worth millions, Dad. If you're not capable of managing it properly, someone needs to step in before you hurt yourself financially." I looked at my daughter, at the woman who used to bring me model boats she'd built in elementary school, who'd cried in my arms at her mother's funeral, who'd asked me to walk her down the aisle 3 years ago, and saw a stranger wearing her face. "Get out," I said. Her eyes widened. "Dad." "Get out of my house." She stood up, smoothing her blouse with hands that didn't shake. "Maybe if you trusted the people who actually care about you, instead of seeing conspiracies everywhere, this family wouldn't be so broken." She left through the front door without looking back, and I stood in the kitchen where Harriet had taught her to bake cookies 35 years ago, listening to her car start in the driveway. I watched my daughter's car disappear down the oak-lined drive, the same drive where I'd taught her to ride a bicycle when she was 6, and understood that some losses happen slowly over years, while others crystallize in a single cold sentence about managing assets effectively. 2 weeks later, Velma Travers called to invite me to lunch. "I know things have been tense," she said in that gracious voice that always sounded like inherited money. "I thought perhaps we could talk. Just us. Families should support each other through difficult times." We met at an upscale restaurant on River Street, the kind with white tablecloths and servers who refilled your water glass before you noticed it was empty. Velma had reserved a private corner table away from the main dining room. She was 76 and elegant as old Savannah itself, wearing pearls and a silk blouse that probably cost more than most people's mortgage payment. The kind of gracious manners that made you forget I'd saved her from bankruptcy 8 years ago with $200,000, until you noticed how carefully she calculated every word, every smile, every gesture of gratitude. "Merle," she said warmly, reaching across to pat my hand. "I'm so glad you came. I've been worried about you." "Worried," I repeated. "Well, yes. Marlene tells me you've been stressed, anxious about the estate, about managing things on your own. It's natural at your age, dear. Harriet handled so much of the details, didn't she? It's a lot for one person." She ordered us both the salmon without asking what I wanted. The server disappeared. "I wanted to talk about family," Velma continued, leaning forward with concern that looked almost genuine. "Bryce loves Marlene so much. He only wants to help you. Perhaps if you trusted him more, there'd be less tension. Don't you think?" I watched her hands, manicured nails, expensive rings, no nervous gestures. Everything about her was too perfect, too calculated. "You saved me 8 years ago when I had nothing," she said softly. "I'll never forget that kindness, Merle. You wrote me a check when the banks wouldn't, when I was about to lose everything. And I want to help make sure this family stays together the way you helped keep mine intact." The salmon arrived. She picked up her fork with the delicate precision of someone who'd been trained in etiquette schools. "Family harmony is so important," she continued, "especially at this stage of life. You should be enjoying your golden years, not worrying about finances and legal matters. That's what children are for, to take care of these burdens so you can rest." Rest. The word hung in the air like a threat. I ate 3 bites of salmon that tasted like cardboard, nodded at appropriate moments, and watched Velma Travers perform the role of concerned mother-in-law with the skill of someone who'd played it before. Predators come in 2 varieties: the ones who chase you down with teeth bared, and the ones who smile while offering to help carry your valuables to safety. Velma Travers was the second kind, and I'd invited her into my life 8 years ago with a check and a handshake. After lunch, I sat in my truck in the restaurant parking lot and called Alvin. "Stop digging into Bryce," I said when he answered. "What?" "Start investigating Velma Travers instead. Everything. Where she was before Savannah, who she knew, what she did. The bankruptcy I saved her from, I want to know if it was real or theater. You think the mother-in-law—" "I don't think Alvin. I know. Bryce isn't the mastermind. He's the weapon. Velma Travers is the hand that wielded it, and she's been planning this since the day I wrote that rescue check. 10 days after I asked Alvin to investigate Velma, he called from Charleston with the kind of carefully controlled voice that meant he'd found something that would keep me awake at night. "I need you on video," he said. "You need to see this, not just hear it." I opened my laptop in Harriet's study and waited for his face to appear on the screen. When it did, he looked older than his 78 years. "Thomas Hildreth," he said without preamble, holding up a photograph. "Charleston. 8 years ago, he was 79 with a riverfront property worth about $2 million. Similar setup to yours, waterfront, historic home, decades of equity." The man in the photo looked happy, standing in front of a white colonial with azaleas blooming in the yard. His son got married in 2014, Alvin continued. Woman he'd met at a charity event. Elegant, well-connected, seemed genuinely interested in the family. The woman who introduced them at that charity event was named Velma Travers. My chest tightened. 6 months after the wedding, Hildreth was in Greenwood Behavioral Health Center, a county nursing home. The property was sold to cover medical expenses. The son and his wife moved to Florida. Hildreth's still there. I visited him yesterday. Alvin pulled up another photo. The same man, but decades seemed to have passed in 8 years. He sat in a wheelchair in a sterile room with linoleum floors and fluorescent lights staring at nothing. He doesn't get visitors, Alvin said quietly. The son stopped coming after the first year. No other family. He has a plastic bracelet with his name on it and a view of a parking lot. That's what's left of a man who built boats in Charleston Harbor for 50 years. I couldn't speak. Here's the critical part. Alvin continued, pulling up legal documents. Velma's scheme almost failed. Hildreth had a younger brother, an attorney in Columbia. He smelled something wrong and started asking questions, filed motions to halt the property transfer. The brother died of a heart attack before the case went to trial, but he'd done enough damage that Velma and her people had to settle for less than they wanted and disappear fast. He leaned closer to the camera. Velma learned from that failure little brother. She learned that family members with legal knowledge are dangerous. That's why this time she made sure you're isolated. No attorney brothers, no powerful friends asking questions. Even Lark's access has been limited by her parents' schedule. Velma spent 8 years perfecting her approach, and you're the proof she got it right. Smart predators learn from their mistakes. Velma Travers had tried this in Charleston and failed because of one protective brother with legal knowledge. So she'd spent 8 years perfecting her approach, and this time she'd made sure. I had no brothers with law degrees, no friends with power, no allies except a 78-year-old investigator and an 11-year-old child. There's one more thing, Alvin said, and his voice dropped even lower. I got access to some administrative records. Greenwood Behavioral Health Center has a reservation on file. He held up a document to the camera. I squinted to read it. Reservation for Merle Lockwood. Expected admission date, 6 weeks from yesterday. Payment arrangement, estate liquidation upon conservatorship approval. They already have your room picked out, Alvin said. Same facility, same parking lot view. 3 days later, I sat across from Opal in her Bull Street office while she spread court documents across her desk, like evidence at a murder trial. Guardianship petition formally filed, she said, pointing to the header. Petitioner Bryce Travers, concerned son-in-law. Supporting documentation includes preliminary psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Helena Crane noting concerning patterns of memory loss, financial mismanagement, and paranoid ideation. She pulled out another document. They're building a medical record of your alleged cognitive decline. Every dinner where you forgot a name. Every phone call where you seemed confused. Every decision they can characterize as poor judgment. Dr. Crane is documenting all of it for the court. How long does guardianship normally take? I asked. 6 to 9 months for standard proceedings, but she tapped the petition. If the petitioner presents evidence of immediate danger to the subject, videos of erratic behavior, witnesses claiming concerning conduct, documented financial irregularities, the court can expedite the process to protect the vulnerable elder. Expedite how much? Weeks instead of months. Especially if they can show you're actively endangering yourself or making decisions that suggest incompetence. How do you fight a legal system designed to protect you from yourself? How do you prove you're competent when the act of fighting back becomes evidence of paranoid delusion? Dr. Crane's evaluation, I said. How long until she finishes? Opal checked the court filing. Her preliminary report is attached, but the full psychiatric profile requires 6 weeks of observation and documentation. After that, she files her expert opinion with the court recommending guardianship status. So we have 6 weeks, I said. Until they have everything they need to expedite the hearing, yes. Once that profile is filed, Bryce can request emergency conservatorship based on immediate mental health concerns. With the right judge and the right presentation, he could have control of your affairs within days. She closed the folder and looked at me with 40 years of legal expertise in her eyes. "What's our move?" she asked. I thought about the cameras recording every room in my house, about Irving Kemp's USB drive documenting Bryce's financial crimes, about Alvin's files on Velma's Charleston victim, about Lark's silent choice to become a soldier, about the decoy account waiting for Bryce to access it. "We have 6 weeks before they complete their documentation," I said. "That's also exactly how long I need to complete mine. The cameras have been recording for 2 months. Bryce found the decoys and thinks he's safe. The real cameras are capturing everything, every conversation, every calculated move, every moment of this conspiracy. And then what? Then we don't wait for them to take me to court. We bring the evidence to them publicly, completely, with no room for appeals or excuses. We turn their guardianship hearing into their trial." Opal smiled. "You'll need witnesses, documentation, a timeline that proves premeditation. I have all of that. I just need 6 more weeks to let them finish incriminating themselves." The countdown had started, and I wasn't going to waste a single day. Floyd Upshaw was watering his azaleas 3 days into my 6-week countdown when he called me over to the fence and said he had something on his new security cameras I might want to see. It was a Tuesday morning early enough that the August heat hadn't settled in yet. Floyd had lived next door for 30 years at 61, with a retired carpenter's careful attention to detail, and he was proud of the security system he'd just installed after a string of car break-ins 2 streets over. "Check this out," he said, holding up his tablet. "Got motion alerts for anything near the property line. Recorded some folks measuring your place a few weeks back, thought you'd hired contractors, but seemed odd they came while you were at the boatyard." I walked over, keeping my expression neutral. Floyd tapped his screen, pulling up footage dated 6 weeks earlier. The timestamp read 10:47 a.m., exactly when I would have been opening the boatyard workshop. The angle showed my property from Floyd's driveway camera. 2 men walked the perimeter of my house. One wore a business suit. The other carried professional measuring equipment, the laser kind that real estate appraisers use. "That's your son-in-law, isn't it?" Floyd said, zooming in on the man in the suit. "Bryce." Clear as daylight. He was pointing at the mansion's windows, the roof line, the property boundaries, while the appraiser made notes on a clipboard and took measurements. "And that other fellow had one of those laser measuring things," Floyd continued. "Spent 40 minutes walking your property line, measuring foundation to fence, documenting everything. I figured you were planning renovations or something." I watched the footage play. Bryce and the appraiser moved with systematic precision, windows, doors, outbuildings, even the historic magnolia tree that added value to the property. They measured everything someone would need for a pre-sale appraisal. "Did you hire them?" Floyd asked. "No," I said quietly. "I didn't hire anyone." Floyd's smile faded. "That's what I was afraid of. Seemed strange them showing up when you weren't home." "Floyd, can you keep that footage for me? Don't delete it. Don't mention it to anyone. Save it somewhere safe. It might be very important." He looked at me for the long moment, then nodded. "I'll burn it to 3 separate drives. 30 years next door, I know when something's not right. Evidence is like kindling. You don't need a mountain of it, just the right pieces in the right arrangement, and a single spark can burn down an entire lie." Floyd's accidental footage was that spark, date-stamped proof that Bryce was treating my property like his own, weeks before any claimed concern about my well-being. A week later, on a Wednesday afternoon, I pretended to fall asleep in my living room armchair. The laptop was hidden on the floor, beside the chair, screen dimmed, but showing 7 camera feeds. I'd positioned myself carefully, head back, mouth slightly open, breathing slow and steady. An old man taking an afternoon nap while the house settled around him. I heard Bryce's key in the back door at 2:15. He moved quietly for a big man. I listened to his footsteps cross the kitchen, pause in the hallway, then continue into the living room. He stood there for a moment. I could feel his presence even with my eyes closed, making sure I was actually asleep. Then he started searching, methodical, professional. He checked the bookshelf first, running his hands along the spines, looking behind picture frames. I heard the small, satisfied sound he made when he found the first decoy camera tucked behind Harriet's gardening books. "Got you," he whispered. He continued searching. The mantelpiece, the crown molding behind the curtains. He never looked at the smoke detector. Never noticed the false screw head in the doorframe. Never glanced twice at the antique clock that had been recording him since the moment he entered. 10 minutes later, he found the second decoy in the hallway. I heard it click as he removed it from the crown molding. Then he made a phone call. "Yeah, I found them," he said, voice low but confident. 2 cameras, both in obvious spots. The old man's more paranoid than we thought, but he's not smart about it. A pause while someone responded. "No, I'm certain. I searched everywhere. Living room, study, hallways. These were the only ones. We're clear now." Another pause, then a laugh. "Exactly. He thinks he was being clever, but all he did was confirm he doesn't trust his own family. Dr. Crane will love this documented paranoid behavior, installing hidden cameras to spy on his daughter. Makes our case even stronger." I lay perfectly still, breathing slow, while Bryce pocketed both decoy cameras. He walked past my chair on his way out, pausing just long enough to look down at me with what I imagined was satisfaction. Maybe pity. The back door closed softly. His car started in the driveway. You want to know the sweetest moment in any trap? It's not when it closes, it's when your enemy checks for traps, finds exactly what you wanted them to find, and walks away thinking they're safe. I opened my eyes and looked at the laptop screen. 7 camera angles. 7 different views of Bryce searching my house, finding the decoys, making his phone call. The smoke detector in the hallway had captured his face in perfect detail. The air vent in the study had recorded his methodical search. The antique clock on the mantelpiece, the one that had watched 3 generations of Lockwoods, had caught him examining the very shelf it sat on, never suspecting it was documenting his every word. "We're clear now," he'd said. He couldn't have been more wrong. I sat up and checked the recording timestamps. Everything saved to the cloud. Everything encrypted. Everything preserved with date and timestamps showing Bryce entering my home without permission, searching my rooms, removing my property, and discussing how to use his findings to build a guardianship case against me. He'd just handed me everything I needed to prove conspiracy, breaking and entering, and intent to defraud. And he'd done it while thinking he'd neutralized my surveillance. One more mistake. That's all I needed him to make. One more recorded conversation. One more documented crime. One more piece of evidence so clear that no court in Georgia would let him walk away. I closed the laptop and looked at the empty shelf where the decoy camera had been. Bryce Travers thought he'd won. He'd just recorded his own confession in 7 different locations, and he had absolutely no idea. Paloma Redmond was 3 weeks into arranging the biggest commission of her career when she noticed the buyer's name on the mansion contract had been filled in 2 weeks before the seller had agreed to sell. She sat in her Savannah Historic District office on a late August afternoon, reviewing the preliminary sale contract Bryce had asked her to sign. The numbers were staggering. A Georgian mansion worth nearly $4 million, her commission calculated at 10%. $400,000 for a single transaction. She'd been a real estate broker for 15 years, at 42 working her way up from showing starter homes to handling estate sales in the historic district. She had an immigrant daughter's hunger for success and an eye for commission that had made her one of the top brokers in Savannah. But something about this contract had been nagging at her since Bryce called 3 days ago asking for her signature on the preliminary documents. "Is the owner ready to proceed?" she'd asked. "He will be," Bryce had said with complete confidence. "Just get the paperwork ready. We're on a tight timeline." Now she read the contract carefully, line by line. Buyer Riverside Holdings, LLC. Expected closing October 15th. Commission structure 10% to listing agent upon successful transfer. She pulled up the date stamp on the document. Filed August 2nd, 3 weeks ago. She opened her email and searched for Bryce's name, scrolling back through their correspondence. There, July 14th, 6 weeks ago, before this contract was drafted. The email read, Paloma wanted to give you advance notice of upcoming opportunity. Significant historic property will be available soon. The old man won't need to be here much longer. Can you handle a $4 million listing? She'd replied enthusiastically. Of course she could handle it. It would be the biggest sale of her career. Now she read that line again. The old man won't need to be here much longer. She'd assumed nursing home, assisted living, the natural progression of an elderly man who could no longer maintain a historic mansion. But the contract showed a buyer already identified and a closing date set for 8 weeks from now. Before Merle Lockwood had signed anything, before he'd even agreed to sell, she opened the property records. Merle Lockwood, age 72, owner since 1980. No liens, no mortgages, no indication of financial distress that would require a forced sale. There's a line most people never have to find the exact moment when ambition crosses into evil. When a big commission becomes blood money, when you realize you've been recruited not for your skills, but for your willingness to not ask questions. Paloma found that line sitting in her office with a contract in her hands and an email on her screen that said the old man won't need to be here much longer. She closed her laptop and stared at the contract. $400,000. That's what she'd agreed to earn for arranging a murder scene. Several nights later, past midnight, my phone buzzed with a notification from the gaming app Lark and I used to play word puzzles. The message came from her account, Oaktree Girl. I picked up the phone, squinting at the screen in the darkness of my bedroom. Grandpa heard Dad talk about Monday's signature. Took picture of laptop file. I'm scared. Don't tell Mom I messaged. Love you. Attached was a PDF. I opened it with hands that had started shaking before my brain fully processed what I was reading. The document was titled Obituary Draft, Merle Lockwood. Merle Lockwood, 72, of Savannah, Georgia, passed away on date to be determined. Born March 15, 1950, he was preceded in death by his beloved wife, Harriet Lockwood. Merle was a master boat builder and owner of Lockwood Marine for 45 years, where he built vessels known throughout the Georgia coast for their craftsmanship and durability. He is survived by his loving daughter, Marlene Perry Travers, and his cherished granddaughter, Lark Travers, who will miss his wisdom, his kindness, and his unwavering dedication to family. Services will be held at location to be determined. In lieu of flowers, the family requests donations to the Savannah Maritime Heritage Foundation. Merle Lockwood lived a life of integrity, hard work, and devotion to those he loved. He will be deeply missed by all who knew him. I read it twice, then a third time. They'd written my obituary. Every detail carefully chosen, my birth date. Harriet's name, the boatyard, the 45 years of work. They'd described me as devoted to family. They'd claimed Lark would miss my wisdom and kindness. And they'd left the date field blank because they hadn't decided yet exactly when they'd kill me. Reading your own obituary is like watching your funeral from inside the coffin. Every word they chose, every memory they claimed to cherish, every lie about loving you all written while you're still breathing. The phone was cold in my hand. The bedroom was dark except for the screen's glow. I didn't cry. I was too shocked for tears, too furious for grief. I looked at the date stamp on the PDF, August 23rd, 4 days ago. They'd spent an evening writing how they'd mourn me, what they'd say at my services, how they'd describe me to people who would read this in the Savannah newspaper after I was dead. Loving daughter, cherished granddaughter, deeply missed. I called Opal's cell phone. It was 2 a.m. She answered on the third ring. Merle, what's wrong? They wrote my obituary, I said. My voice sounded strange, flat, distant, like someone else was speaking. Complete obituary. Services to be determined. Date to be determined. Everything else already decided. Jesus, she whispered. They're not planning to steal from me, Opal. They're planning when to bury me. We move in 3 weeks, not 6. Whatever we were going to do in 6 weeks, we do it in 4. Merle, 3 weeks. Can you make it work? A long pause, then, yes, but it'll be close. Close is good enough. They've already written my death notice. I'm not giving them time to pick a date. I hung up and sat in the dark, staring at that PDF on my phone, my name, my dates, my granddaughter's name listed among the cherished survivors who would mourn me at services to be determined. For the first time in 6 months of surveillance and strategy and careful control, I wasn't just protecting myself. I was genuinely, burningly angry. And angry men don't wait 6 weeks when 4 will do. 2 weeks after I saw my own obituary, Dexter called from the bank to tell me that someone had just accessed the $4.2 million they thought they were going to inherit. I was at the boatyard office on an early September morning sanding the hull of a 20-footer that didn't need sanding because my hands needed something to do while my mind worked through the final pieces of what I'd built over 6 months. Dexter's voice had that careful banker tone again, the one that meant something significant had happened to my money. Someone accessed the Harriet Lockwood Memorial account at 2:17 yesterday morning, he said. Used your exact credentials, username, password, even bypassed the 2-factor authentication somehow. But it wasn't from your usual devices. I set down the sandpaper. What did they access? Everything. Account balance, investment portfolio, beneficiary designations. They spent 42 minutes reviewing the entire structure. Then they transferred viewing privileges to a secondary email address, whose email registered to a B. Travers, Bryce Travers, I assume. I closed my eyes. Did you block the access? No. Dexter paused. You told me back in March to let you know if anyone tried again, but not to prevent it unless you specifically requested. So I let the access complete. They think they now have viewing control over $4.2 million. The best traps are the ones where your enemy doesn't just walk into danger. They walk into it, counting the money they think they've already stolen, so confident they forget to look for the steel jaws closing behind them. Good, I said. That's exactly what I needed. There's one more detail, Dexter said quietly. The access came from your home IP address, Merle, your mansion's internet connection, at 2:17 in the morning. I stood up, legs suddenly unsteady. Only 2 people could have been sitting at a computer in your house at that hour, Dexter continued. And one of them would need to know where you keep your passwords. Marlene, at my computer, in the middle of the night. Not manipulated, not coerced. Actively physically participating in the conspiracy to access my accounts and transfer control to her husband. Thank you, Dexter, I managed. Keep monitoring. Let me know if they try to move any funds. They can't, he said. They have viewing privileges only, but they don't know that yet. As far as they understand, they're one signature away from full control. One signature. Mine. Probably planned for September 15th at whatever celebration they'd arranged. I hung up and stared at the unfinished boat in front of me, thinking about my daughter sitting at my computer at 2:17 in the morning, typing in passwords she'd memorized or copied, transferring access to accounts she thought would be hers after I was gone. A week later, I sat across from Lester Graves on the outdoor terrace of the Savannah Golf Club, watching him drink iced tea and study me with the patient attention of someone who'd spent 3 decades listening to people lie in federal courtrooms. Lester was 58, but carried himself like a man 20 years older, retired federal judge with that permanent air of authority that made lawyers straighten their spines and liars reconsider their stories before he even asked the first question. We'd been friends for 40 years since our early days in the Savannah Maritime Association, stayed friends through careers that took us in different directions, played golf twice a year when his schedule allowed. You didn't invite me here to talk about handicaps, he said after we'd covered the pleasantries. No, I agreed. I'm planning a housewarming party, September 15th. Just family and a few close friends. I'd like you to come, Lester. Just as my old friend from college, nothing more. He set down his glass and looked at me directly. You don't need an old friend, Merle. You need a credible witness. Someone whose testimony afterward carries weight nobody can challenge. That's why you're asking a federal judge, not a college buddy. I met his eyes without flinching. Yes, what am I witnessing? I can't tell you specifics because I need your observations to be independent and unbiased. But I can tell you, this people I trusted have been planning something for a long time. September 15th, they're going to make their final move. And I need someone there whose word no court, no lawyer, and no conspiracy can dismiss. Lester was quiet for a long moment, watching a foursome tee off on the ninth hole. Authority isn't just about power. It's about credibility so unassailable that when you speak, even liars stop lying because they know nobody will believe them over you. When I stand up in a room and say what I witnessed, Lester said slowly, there's no taking it back. Prosecutors listen. Defense attorneys back down. Juries believe. Courts act on my testimony because I spent 30 years proving I don't lie from the bench. You understand that? I'm counting on it. And if what I witness is serious enough to require my testimony, we're not talking about family drama. We're talking about crimes. Yes, he studied me for another long moment. Are you in danger? I was. Now I'm prepared. Will anyone else be in danger at this party? Only the people who created the danger in the first place. Lester picked up his iced tea again, took a long drink, then nodded once. I'll be there, he said. September 15th. What time? 6:30? I'll arrive at 6:15. Federal judges are always early. He extended his hand across the table. But Merle, I hope you know what you're doing. Because once I witness something that requires my testimony, there's no going back for any of us. I shook his hand. I know exactly what I'm doing. We finished our drinks talking about golf and grandchildren and the weather. But underneath the comfortable conversation was the weight of what I'd asked and what he'd agreed to provide judicial authority that would transform whatever happened on September 15th from family dispute into documented criminal case. When this was over, there'd be no question about what happened, not with Lester Graves as witness. But first, I needed to understand exactly who had been pulling Bryce's strings all along, because the conspiracy I'd uncovered had Velma's fingerprints all over it, and I needed proof before I could show the world what she'd built. 1 week after Lester agreed to witness, I drove 2 hours to Charleston, because Alvin said what he'd discovered about Velma Travers was too dangerous to discuss over any phone line encrypted or not. It was mid-September, a Thursday morning, with the kind of Carolina heat that made the asphalt shimmer. Alvin's office was in a converted warehouse near the harbor, the kind of place private investigators use when they need space for evidence boards and file cabinets that shouldn't be seen from the street. He met me at the door and led me straight to the conference room without small talk. The table was covered photographs, timelines, financial records, witness statements, documents arranged in careful rows like evidence at trial. 18 months of investigation, he said, spreading his hands over the files. And I was wrong, Merle. We were all wrong. Bryce isn't the mastermind, he's the hammer. The woman we know as Velma Travers has been building this for 5 years, maybe longer, and I'm not even sure Velma is her real name. I pulled out a chair and sat down slowly. Alvin picked up a photograph. Marlene at a charity fundraiser smiling in an evening gown talking to a man I didn't recognize. Atlanta, 2017. 5 years ago. Marlene was 37, single, working pharmaceutical sales. This is the Riverside Development Gala the night she met Bryce Travers, or rather the night Velma arranged for them to meet. He laid out more photos. Marlene at different events over several months. And in the background of each one, carefully positioned, was Velma Travers. She didn't just introduce them at a party, Alvin continued. She identified and selected Marlene as a target. Studied her for months. Learned her schedule, her habits, her vulnerabilities. By the time Bryce accidentally sat next to her at that gala, Velma knew everything about your daughter, including that her widowed father owned a boatyard, and a Georgian mansion worth over $8 million. He pulled another document from the stack, a handwritten list on yellowed legal paper. 12 names, next to each name an age, a location, and a dollar amount. I found my name 7th from the top. Merle Lockwood, 72, Savannah, Georgia. $8.2 million. Her target list, Alvin said quietly. Wealthy widowers with unmarried adult children. She tracks them like a hunter tracks deer waiting for the perfect moment of vulnerability. You're number 7. I've been trying to trace the others. So far, I've confirmed 3 that match her pattern. All of them lost property or assets. 2 ended up in nursing homes. 1 died. The most dangerous predators aren't the ones driven by immediate need. They're the ones who can wait years, decades, even watching their target from a distance, learning every weakness, every vulnerability, every person worth loving enough to exploit. I touched the paper with my name on it. The ink was old. This list had been written years ago. Bryce Travers, I said. How does he fit? Recruited. Alvin pulled up more files. Velma finds men with certain profiles, ambitious, charming, desperate for money, willing to bend rules. She trains them, funds their lifestyle, positions them near her selected targets. Bryce is her latest weapon, but he's not the first. She's done this before, and Marlene doesn't know. I don't think so. Based on everything I've found, your daughter believes she fell in love naturally. Believes Bryce chose her. Believes his interest in your estate is normal spousal concern. Velma's good at creating that illusion, the caring mother-in-law who just wants family harmony. I stared at the photographs, at my daughter's smiling face in image after image, never knowing she was being positioned like a chess piece. Why? I asked. Why did Velma choose me specifically? 12 names on this list. What makes me number 7? Alvin was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out one more document, a bank record from 2014, 8 years ago. A check for $200,000 signed by me, made out to Velma Travers. 8 years ago, you saved Velma from bankruptcy, Alvin said. She was about to lose everything, her house, her savings, her reputation. You wrote this check when banks wouldn't help her. You thought you were being kind. I was being kind, I said. You were witnessing her failure. Alvin's voice was gentle but firm. You saw her at her absolute lowest, broke, desperate, humiliated. She thanked you then, sent you holiday cards for years, introduced you to her son when he married your daughter. But that gratitude, it was a lie, Merle. She felt humiliated that someone had seen her fail, and she's been planning to take everything from you since the moment you handed her that check. Some people say revenge is a dish best served cold, but they don't understand the real recipe. 8 years of smiling gratitude, of holiday cards and thank you notes, of positioning yourself so close to your target that when you finally strike, they never see it coming because they think you're family. The bankruptcy itself was staged. Alvin continued, showing me more documents. Or at least exaggerated. She had assets, hidden money in her son's name, property transfers that looked like sales but were actually shields. Your $200,000 didn't save her, it funded her next operation. She used your charity to build her weapon. I stood up, walked to the window overlooking Charleston Harbor. Boats moved across the water. Normal people doing normal work. While I'd spent 8 years thinking I'd helped someone, she'd spent those same years planning how to destroy me for having the audacity to witness her at her weakest. Every dinner, I said quietly, every family gathering, every time she praised Bryce for loving Marlene. Every thank you for that check 8 years ago. It was all strategy, Alvin finished. Patience weaponized into an 8-year revenge plot. She got close enough that you'd never suspect her. Made herself family so she'd have access to everything. Your routines, your relationships, your assets, your weaknesses. And when the time was right, she aimed Bryce at Marlene and pulled the trigger. I turned back to the conference table, to that target list with my name on it, to the files documenting 8 years of methodical positioning. The party is in 5 days, I said. I know. She spent 8 years building this. I have 5 days to dismantle it. Alvin nodded. Everything you need is in these files. Witness statements, financial records, the target list proof of her pattern with other victims. But Merle, she's going to be there too, at your party, watching. She won't know we've uncovered her, and that gives us advantage. But it also means you'll be in the same room with someone who's spent 8 years planning your destruction. I looked at my brother at 18 months of his work spread across that table. Good, I said. I want her there. I want her to see exactly what happens when you underestimate a man you think you've defeated. Days after I discovered Velma's 8-year revenge plot, the first crack appeared in her perfect plan when Paloma Redmond called Opal Whitfield and said she needed to confess before someone got killed. Opal arranged the meeting at a small cafe on the edge of Savannah's historic district. She called me afterward from her car. Paloma brought emails, Opal said without preamble. Written proof, Bryce's own words. What did they say? August 14th. Quote, the old man won't need the house anymore before year end. The mansion sale closing is scheduled for December 20th. 3-month window between your death and the property transfer. I gripped the phone tighter. She has this in writing. Multiple emails. Bryce discussing timeline, Velma confirming arrangements. They documented their murder conspiracy in corporate email because they thought they'd already won. What does Paloma want? Immunity. Witness protection. She's terrified. Asked if I'd testify that she cooperated. Opal paused. I told her yes. And I told her you've known about this conspiracy for 6 months. That you've been waiting for her to realize she'd crossed a line. That you knew she'd come eventually. How did she react? Relief mixed with fear. She thought she was being clever. She didn't realize she was being monitored all along. Conspiracies fall apart from the edges first. The people recruited for greed rather than hate the ones who signed up for theft. But draw the line at murder, the accomplices who realize too late that blood money leaves permanent stains. The emails are enough, I said, combined with everything else. More than enough. When Irving hands that USB to Lester at the party, and Paloma testifies about these emails, and your cameras show Bryce searching your house, there won't be any reasonable doubt left. I looked out at the boatyard, at the half-finished hull that had been sitting there for 6 months, while I built something else entirely. Thank you, Opal. Don't thank me yet. This gets worse before it gets better. Before I tell you what happened next, are you still with me? Comment, say. If you think Marlene can still be saved from this, or B, if you think she's too far gone, and tell me why in one sentence. A quick note. What follows includes some recreated details for storytelling purposes, but the core truth is what matters. 3 days later, Alvin called from Charleston. Irving's ready, he said, finally committed. What changed? Bryce filed a lawsuit against him yesterday, claiming Irving gave negligent financial advice. It's a preemptive strike to discredit him, but it backed Irving into a corner where cooperation is self-preservation. I sat down at my kitchen table. When? The party, September 15th. He'll come uninvited, walk straight through your front door. Won't go to you, he'll go directly to Lester Graves. Hand him the USB in front of 40 witnesses. Not to police, not to lawyers, to a federal judge publicly. I closed my eyes, seeing it play out. Irving walking through my door with 18 months of evidence. Bryce's face when he recognized the accountant he'd cheated. Velma's calculations shifting to panic. Marlene watching her husband's crimes exposed. It's perfect, I said. Is it? Alvin's voice was quiet. Because I need to ask you something. Are you sure about this path? Because after that party night, Marlene won't be your daughter in the same way she is now. Once Lester sees that evidence, there's no walking it back. You understand that. There are moments when you choose between the family you raised and the family you're trying to save, between the daughter who became a stranger and the granddaughter who still believes in you. Sometimes love means letting one go to protect the other. The silence lasted long enough for both of us to understand what I was choosing. Marlene stopped being my daughter the night she sat at my computer at 2 a.m. helping Bryce access my accounts. I finally said. The moment she helped write my obituary while I was still breathing. This isn't about getting Marlene back. That ship sailed when she decided I was worth more dead than alive. This is about making sure Lark doesn't lose her grandfather the way I've already lost my daughter. Alvin was quiet for a long moment. All right, he said finally. Then we're committed. Irving walks through that door on September 15th. Lester receives the evidence, and whatever happens after that is justice, I finished. Not revenge, justice. I hope you're right, little brother, because once this starts, there's no stopping it halfway. After he hung up, I sat in my kitchen thinking about Marlene at 7 years old, learning to build model boats at this same table. Thinking about her at 17, crying in my arms when her first boyfriend broke her heart. Thinking about her at 42, walking down the aisle toward Bryce Travers while I gave her away, not knowing I was handing her to a weapon Velma had sharpened over years. Somewhere between that wedding and tonight, I'd lost my daughter to a conspiracy she either fully understood or was too deep in to escape. And in 3 weeks, I'd have to watch her face when Irving handed that USB to Lester, and the truth came out in front of everyone she knew. But Lark would be safe. Lark would know her grandfather fought for her. Lark would understand that sometimes the people you love make choices that mean you can't save them. You can only save the ones they're trying to destroy. 2 weeks before the party that would end, my daughter came to the mansion with papers to sign, and I made one last attempt to find the child I'd raised inside the stranger she'd become. It was September 1st, late evening. Marlene arrived alone carrying a manila folder that she placed carefully on the kitchen table between us. "Dad, I brought some documents," she said in that practiced voice. "Just for peace of mind. Estate planning, nothing complicated." I didn't reach for them. Instead, I put the kettle on for tea the way I'd done 1,000 times when she was young and needed to talk. "Do you remember," I said quietly, pouring hot water over the tea bags, "when you were 7 years old and I taught you to build model boats? You sat on my workbench at the boatyard for 3 hours, tongue between your teeth, concentrating so hard you forgot about lunch." She went very still. For one split second, a single heartbeat, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition. Memory. The child who'd loved those afternoons with sawdust in her hair and glue on her fingers. She started. Then the mask came back. Smooth, professional, cold. "That was a long time ago, Dad." I set her teacup down gently. "What happened to that little girl? She grew up." Marlene stood, leaving the tea untouched. "Just sign the papers. Don't make this difficult for everyone. We're trying to help you." "Are you—" She picked up the folder, placed it on the counter, and walked to the door. She didn't look back. "The party's in 2 weeks," she said. "September 15th. I hope you'll be reasonable by then." After she left, I looked at the unsigned papers on my counter. That split second of recognition told me everything I needed to know. My daughter wasn't gone. She was choosing this. Every step, every lie, every moment of this conspiracy. And somehow that was worse than if she'd been completely manipulated. 4 days later, on September 5th, Lark came to visit for the weekend. We sat on the boatyard dock watching the Savannah River move past in the afternoon sun. She didn't waste time on small talk. "Grandpa," she said, dangling her feet over the water, "will Mom and Dad go to jail after the housewarming party?" I could have lied. Could have said everything would be fine, that families work things out, that she didn't need to worry. But I'd never lied to Lark, and I wasn't going to start now. "I don't know, Lark," I said honestly. "I truly don't know what will happen, but I promise you'll never be alone, no matter what." She nodded, processing this like the smart 11-year-old she was. Then she asked the question that broke my heart and rebuilt it simultaneously. "Do you want me to come to the party? I mean, do you want me there when whatever's going to happen happens?" There's a particular kind of bravery that belongs only to children. The courage to choose right over easy when you're 11 years old, and the people you're standing against are the ones who tuck you in at night, the ones you call mom and dad. Yes, Lark, I said. I want you there. But you need to know after that night our lives will be different. Everything will be different. Your relationship with your parents, your home situation, school, everything. It's going to be hard. She thought about this for a long time, watching a boat move across the water. Life isn't so good now either, Grandpa, she finally said. Her voice was small but steady. At least this way, maybe it gets better instead of worse. I put my arm around her shoulders, and we sat there until the sun started setting, an old man and a child, who'd both chosen truth over comfortable lies. On September 14th, the night before the party, I sat alone in Harriet's study conducting my final checklist. I called Opal first. Warrant signed. Yes, Judge approved it this afternoon. Thank you. Alvin next. Irving's coming. He'll be there. 7:30 as planned. Good. Dexter. Bank records sealed and ready. Everything's documented and secure. Waiting for the legal request. Perfect. Lester last. 7 o'clock. I'll be there at 6:45. Federal judges are always early. After the calls, I pulled out stationery and wrote a short letter to Marlene. Not a legal document. Not an explanation. Just a father writing to his daughter, Marlene. I don't know if you'll ever read this or if you'll care, but I need you to know that even after everything, you're still my daughter. I'm sorry I couldn't save you from yourself. I hope someday you understand why I had to save Lark instead. I folded it, wrote her name on the envelope, and left it on the desk unsent. Maybe she'd find it someday. Maybe she wouldn't. I looked at Harriet's photograph, the one that had sat on this desk for 40 years. Honey, I said to the empty room, to the image of my wife smiling in the garden we'd planted together. I hope I did the right thing. Tomorrow night we'll find out if love is stronger than revenge, or if Velma Travers planned better than I did. You can prepare for battle for months. Gather evidence, recruit allies, build perfect traps. But preparation and peace are different things. Peace comes only when you accept that some outcomes can't be controlled, only endured. I went to bed that night and slept the way I hadn't slept since Dexter's first phone call 18 months ago. Deeply, dreamlessly, with Harriet's photograph on the nightstand and that unsent letter to Marlene on my desk. Tomorrow at 7 o'clock, 40 guests would arrive at my Georgian mansion for what Bryce and Velma thought was their victory celebration. They had no idea Irving Kemp would be walking through that door with a USB drive. They didn't know Lester Graves would be standing by the fireplace with 30 years of federal authority behind his eyes. They couldn't imagine that an 11-year-old girl was ready to testify that her grandfather had never been anything but sane. Tomorrow, 8 years of Velma's revenge would collide with 18 months of my preparation, and we'd finally learn which force was stronger. The chandeliers blazed like judgment above 40 witnesses who had no idea they'd come to watch justice. I arrived at my own party 20 minutes late, standing in the doorway of my Georgian mansion, while my daughter and her husband greeted guests as if they already owned the place. The September evening was warm, and someone had opened all the windows to let in the river breeze. Crystal chandeliers lit the parlor. Floral arrangements worth thousands lined the mantelpiece. A jazz quartet played soft music in the corner. 40 people in formal attire drinking champagne, celebrating what Marlene and Bryce thought was the beginning of their inheritance. I watched from the foyer before anyone noticed me. Marlene moved through the crowd in a silk dress, smiling that practiced smile, touching arms and laughing at jokes. "So wonderful you could celebrate with us tonight," she said to couple after couple. "Dad's so excited about this new chapter." Bryce stood near the fireplace holding court with a group of neighbors. "This house represents our family's future together," he was saying, gesturing at the crown molding Harriet and I had restored 30 years ago, preserving it for the next generation. Velma Travers sat in the corner chair, like a spider in her web, watching everything with those calculating eyes. When Marlene passed, Velma caught her arm and whispered something. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Marlene's face tighten. "Where is he?" Velma was asking. Looking for me, wondering why the guest of honor hadn't arrived at his own housewarming party. Lester Graves stood by the east window, with a glass of sparkling water, looking exactly like what he was, a retired federal judge who'd spent 30 years presiding over courtrooms. Our eyes met briefly. He nodded once. Floyd Upshaw was near the hallway, the neighbor who'd accidentally recorded Bryce measuring my property on his security cameras. He saw me in the doorway and raised his glass in silent acknowledgement. Opal Whitfield stood near the dining room, elegant in a navy dress, Harriet's oldest friend and my co-trustee. She'd positioned herself where she could see everything. I adjusted my suit jacket, perfectly pressed for this moment, and walked into my own party. The conversations didn't stop immediately, but I felt the ripple as people noticed me. Marlene's head snapped up. Bryce's smile froze mid-sentence. Velma's hand tightened on her champagne glass. "Sorry I'm late," I said loudly enough for the room to hear. "Wanted to make sure everything was perfect tonight." I shook hands as I moved through the crowd. Neighbors I'd known for decades. Business associates. People from the yacht club and the historical society. Ordinary people who'd come to celebrate what they thought was a happy family occasion. They had no idea they were about to become witnesses. Marlene recovered first, coming toward me with that practiced daughter smile. "Dad, we were worried. The party started at 6:30. "I know. Had some last-minute details to attend to." I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server. "Beautiful job with the flowers." "Thank you." Her eyes searched my face, looking for something. Confusion, compliance, I gave her nothing but a calm smile. Bryce joined us, putting his arm around Marlene's waist. "Great turnout. Everyone's excited to celebrate this milestone with you." "Milestone," I repeated. "That's one word for it." The jazz quartet played on. People talked and laughed. The smell of catered hors d'oeuvres mixed with expensive perfumes in the warm air. Everything looked perfect. Felt perfect. Except for the tension crackling between me and the three people who'd spent 18 months planning my death. 45 minutes later, she made her move. I was standing near the center of the parlor, talking with an old friend from the Maritime Association, when Marlene appeared at my elbow. She waited for a polite break in the conversation, then touched my arm gently. "Dad," she said in that soft voice, "could we speak privately for just a moment? There's a small formality about the house transfer we should finalize while everyone's here." She had a manila envelope in her hand. The same papers she'd brought 2 weeks ago. The ones I hadn't signed. The room wasn't quiet yet. People were still talking, still drinking. But I felt Lester turn slightly toward us. Felt Opal shift her position to hear better. Felt Floyd step closer. "No need for privacy, sweetheart," I said loudly. "Clearly, these are all friends." Marlene's smile flickered. "It's just paperwork, Dad. Legal documents. Won't take 5 minutes in your study." "If it concerns this house," I said, projecting my voice across the parlor, "then everyone here should witness it." The conversations began to die. One by one, people stopped talking and turned toward us. The jazz quartet faltered, then stopped playing. Bryce moved to Marlene's side. "Dad, this is uncomfortable for everyone. Let's just step into the study." "No." I stood my ground in the center of the room, surrounded by 40 witnesses who were starting to realize this wasn't a normal family discussion. If my daughter has papers for me to sign, she can present them here, in front of everyone. Marlene's professional mask cracked. "You're being unreasonable." "Am I?" I looked at her, at Bryce, at Velma, watching from her corner chair with those predator eyes. "I think I'm being perfectly clear. You want something from me. Ask for it publicly. Let everyone hear what you're asking." That's when I felt it. 40 pairs of eyes. 40 witnesses suddenly aware that something was very wrong. The champagne conversations and polite laughter had evaporated. The room held its breath. Bryce put his hand on Marlene's arm, trying to pull her back, trying to salvage the situation. But it was too late for salvage, too late for privacy, too late for anything but the truth. I smiled at my daughter, at her husband, at the woman who'd spent 8 years planning this moment. "Tonight will end beautifully," I said. "I guarantee it." 40 people held their breath. No one moved. And outside I heard a car door close. Footsteps on the front walk. The doorbell about to ring. Irving Kemp had arrived. The front door opened, and Irving Kemp walked in like he owned the place. I'd been waiting for that sound, the doorbell, the footsteps, the moment when 18 months of Irving's bitter patience would finally matter. He stood in the foyer for half a second, taking in the scene. The frozen parlor, the 40 witnesses, the conspirators who'd destroyed his financial life standing among crystal and champagne. He didn't wait to be invited. Didn't look for me. Just started walking. The crowd parted instinctively. Something about the way he moved, deliberate, unstoppable, carrying the weight of a man who'd waited a long time for this moment. "Who is that?" someone whispered behind me. Irving Kemp was 58, with an accountant's careful posture and the cold eyes of someone who'd been cheated out of $180,000 by a man who thought he was too stupid to keep receipts. He walked past the jazz quartet, past the flower arrangements, past the neighbors holding champagne glasses, past me without a word, without acknowledgement. Bryce saw him. I watched my son-in-law's face go from confused to pale to something close to terror in the space of 3 seconds. The manila envelope with papers for me to sign slipped from Marlene's hand and hit the hardwood floor. No one bent to pick it up. "You..." Bryce's voice came out strangled. "What are you doing here?" Irving didn't answer him. Didn't even look at him. Just kept walking toward the fireplace where Lester Graves stood with a glass of sparkling water and 30 years of federal judicial authority behind his eyes. That's when Velma moved. The first time all evening I'd seen her calculation shift to alarm. She stood from her corner chair, started toward Marlene, toward Bryce, toward some kind of control over a situation that was sliding away from her. But Irving was already there, standing in front of Lester, reaching into his jacket pocket. The room held its breath. He pulled out a USB drive, small, black, containing everything Bryce thought he'd hidden. That's when I understood Irving wasn't asking permission. He was delivering evidence. "Judge Graves," Irving said, loud enough for every person in that parlor to hear. "Here are Bryce Travers's complete financial records. Shell companies registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. Money transfers to offshore accounts. Email correspondence confirming a coordinated plot to seize Merle Lockwood's assets through fraudulent guardianship proceedings." He placed the USB in Lester's hand. "Everything's documented. Dates, amounts, communications with co-conspirators. The forensic trail shows systematic fraud beginning approximately 3 years ago and continuing through yesterday." The silence in that room was absolute. 40 people who'd come for champagne and small talk were suddenly witnesses to something that belonged in a courtroom. Bryce lunged. No calculation, no strategy, just pure panic driving him forward, arm extended, reaching for that USB drive like he could make 18 months of evidence disappear if he could just get his hands on it. "You dare," he started. Lester Graves stood, not fast, not dramatic. Just stood the way a federal judge stands when he's about to deliver a ruling that will change lives. That calm, absolute authority that comes from 3 decades presiding over courtrooms where truth matters and lies have consequences. "Mr. Travers," he said. 2 words, quiet, with the weight of every trial he'd ever presided over behind them. "Do not move." Time stopped. Bryce mid-lunge. Lester standing, USB between them like a grenade. Bryce froze, arm still extended, face twisted with rage and fear, and the sudden understanding that he'd walked into a trap so complete It had 40 witnesses and a federal judge holding the evidence. Marlene made a sound. Not quite a gasp. Not quite a cry. The sound of someone watching everything they'd planned for 3 years collapse in the space of 30 seconds. Velma was the only one who stayed silent, calculating even now, looking for exits, looking for angles, looking for any way to salvage 8 years of patient revenge. Lester held up the USB where everyone could see it. "This is evidence in what appears to be an ongoing criminal conspiracy," he said in that judge's voice that carried to every corner of the room. "As a retired federal judge, I'm placing this under protective custody pending proper law enforcement review. Mr. Travers, I strongly advise you to remain exactly where you are and say nothing further without legal counsel." He looked at me then. Brief, acknowledging. The look that said you were right to ask me here. This needed a witness with unassailable credibility. Bryce's arm slowly lowered. His face had gone from rage to ash pale. Behind him I heard Marlene start to cry. Not loud, just quiet tears that said she understood what had just happened. She'd bet everything on a conspiracy that had just been exposed in front of 40 witnesses and a federal judge. Someone in the crowd pulled out a phone. Then another. Then several more. Recording. Documenting. Becoming the witnesses I'd needed them to be. Floyd Upshaw stepped forward from the hallway. "Judge Graves, I have security footage on my phone if you need it. Shows Bryce and an appraiser measuring Merle's property 6 weeks ago while Merle was at his boatyard. Timestamps, GPS data, everything." Opal moved from the dining room. "I have copies of the guardianship petition filed 3 weeks ago, and email correspondence from a real estate broker documenting discussions about mansion liquidation before the owner had agreed to sell." One by one, the pieces fell into place in front of 40 witnesses. Not just Irving's evidence, not just Lester's authority, but a coordinated revelation that showed them this wasn't spontaneous. This was justice that had been building for 18 months. Bryce stood frozen. Marlene stood crying. Velma stood calculating. And Lester Graves stood holding a USB drive with 30 years of federal judicial authority radiating from his posture, making it absolutely clear that whatever happened next would have the full weight of law behind it. 40 witnesses held their breath. Because outside I heard another car door close. More footsteps. Alvin was bringing the final piece. And after that, there would be no escape for any of them. The side door opened and Alvin walked in carrying a laptop like it was evidence at trial. My brother was 78, but moved with the deliberate precision of a man who'd spent 40 years building fraud cases that prosecutors couldn't lose. He didn't acknowledge the frozen tableau, Bryce with his arm still half extended, Lester holding the USB 40 witnesses with phones out, recording everything. He walked straight to the television mounted above the fireplace and connected his laptop with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this before. The screen flickered to life. "Before Judge Graves reviews that financial evidence," Alvin said to the room, "I think everyone should see something else. Context matters." He pressed play. The footage was crystal clear. My mansion study. Date stamp in the corner, July 15th, 2023. 2 months ago. Marlene and Bryce sat at my desk. The one where Harriet used to pay bills. Where I'd written that letter to Marlene 2 weeks ago. Marlene held papers. Reading them carefully. The guardianship petition Dr. Crane had been building. Her face wasn't stressed. Wasn't confused. Wasn't the face of a manipulated victim. She was nodding. "Once Dad signs the estate transfer," her recorded voice said clearly, "we proceed with the nursing home paperwork. Dr. Crane said the competency evaluation gives us legal cover for at least 6 months, probably longer." Bryce's voice. "And the house sale, December closing. Paloma has the buyer lined up. Old man won't be able to contest it from a facility." Someone in the crowd gasped. A woman's voice whispered, "She knew. She knew the whole time." I didn't look at Marlene. Couldn't yet. I looked at Lark instead. My 11-year-old granddaughter sat in the corner chair where Velma had been earlier. Tears streamed down her face. Not loud crying, just silent tears of a child watching her mother prove she'd been planning to destroy her grandfather. Watching the person who tucked her in at night discuss nursing homes and legal cover and house sales. Heartbreak and catharsis combined in one small face. Marlene's voice cut through the room. That footage it's out of context. I was just out of context, Alvin repeated flatly. He paused the video on her face. That nodding, calculating expression. This is raw security camera footage. Date stamped. Unedited. Your voice discussing plans to institutionalize your father and sell his property without his knowledge or consent. He looked at the 40 witnesses. This isn't manipulation. This is conspiracy. Marlene's mask was gone. Now it was Velma's turn. Alvin turned from the screen to the woman who'd been silent throughout everything. The woman who'd sat in her corner calculating, planning, watching her 8 years of revenge unravel. Velma Travers, Alvin said. His voice shifted, became the investigator voice I'd heard on phone calls for 18 months. Or should I use your birth name, Eloise Travers? Velma's expression didn't change. Still calculating, still looking for angles. Alvin pulled up another document on the screen. Case file. Charleston, South Carolina, 2015. 8 years ago, a 79-year-old man named Thomas Hildreth lost his riverfront home. His son had recently married. The scheme was sophisticated guardianship petition competency evaluation, same pattern we're seeing tonight. The conspiracy failed because Hildreth's brother was an attorney who intervened. He zoomed in on a detail in the file. A name. The victim's brother, the attorney who stopped the conspiracy, was a friend of the man who'd lent Velma Travers $200,000 to escape bankruptcy that same year. That man's name was Merle Lockwood. The room went absolutely silent. You didn't just target my brother randomly, Alvin continued. You targeted him because he witnessed your failure, because he saved you when you were at your lowest, and you couldn't forgive him for seeing you that way. This isn't theft. This is 8 years of revenge dressed up as family concern. I looked at Velma, really looked at her for the first time since the party started. She smiled, not the gracious mother-in-law smile, not the grateful rescued woman smile. Her first real smile of the entire night. I saved you 8 years ago, I said quietly. $200,000 when the banks wouldn't help you. You sat in my kitchen and cried. Thanked me for believing in you when everyone else had given up. You've been planning this since that day. 8 years. She'd spent 8 years planning revenge against the man who saved her. Planning. Velma's voice was cold, amused. I've been executing Merle. There's a difference. Planning is what amateurs do. I identified your daughter 5 years ago. Recruited Bryce 4 years ago. Positioned him in pharmaceutical sales circles where Marlene would meet him. Orchestrated a romance. A wedding. 3 years of building trust while documenting every forgotten name, every missed appointment, every sign that could be spun as cognitive decline. She stood, smoothed her dress, looked at the 40 witnesses recording everything. You wrote me a check because you thought it was the right thing to do. The kind thing. The moral thing. Her smile widened. And what did that kindness get you? 18 months of fear. A daughter who chose money over you. A granddaughter who'll need therapy for years. This world doesn't reward good people, Merle. It rewards the smart. The ones who understand that every kindness is a weakness someone else can exploit. The room was frozen again. But different this time. Not shock, horror. 40 people watching a woman admit to 8 years of calculated revenge against someone who'd saved her life. I met her eyes, held them. Let her see that I wasn't afraid. Wasn't broken. Wasn't defeated. Tonight we'll see who's right, I said. Because outside I heard more footsteps, more doors opening, the sound of people with actual authority arriving. Velma had spent 8 years being smart, building plans, exploiting kindness, proving that the world rewarded clever predators over decent people. But she'd made one mistake. She'd assumed that because I was good, I was stupid. That because I'd helped her once, I wouldn't see her coming the second time. She'd spent 8 years being smart. I'd spent 18 months being smarter. The doorbell rang and Opal answered like she'd been waiting for it. She had been. We both had. While Velma delivered her cold confession about rewarding the smart over the good, while 40 witnesses stood frozen in my living room with their phones recording everything, Opal had positioned herself by the front door. Waiting for the sound that would prove tonight wasn't about being smart. It was about being right. 2 detectives walked in first. Plainclothes badges clipped to their belts. 4 uniformed officers followed. The kind of entrance that changes the air in a room: professional, inevitable, final. The lead detective, 50s, gray hair, tired eyes that had seen too many schemes like this one, scanned the crowd and locked onto Velma first. "Bryce Travers, Velma. Travers, Marlene Perry Travers," he said clearly, making sure everyone could hear, making sure this moment was witnessed and recorded and undeniable. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit elder fraud, forgery, and attempted theft. You have the right to remain silent." Bryce was the first to react, always the weakest link. "This is a mistake," he started, but the officer was already pulling his arms behind his back. The metallic click of handcuffs closing silenced him mid-sentence. His face went from indignant to panicked as the reality of 40 witnesses with video evidence finally hit him. Velma stood perfectly still. That calculating expression never left her face. Even as the officer read her rights, even as another set of handcuffs closed around her wrists, she looked like she was working angles, planning appeals, considering which lawyer to call first. 8 years of revenge ending in arrest, and she still thought she could think her way out. But Marlene, my daughter, stood in the center of the living room, right where she'd stood 90 minutes ago accepting congratulations on my housewarming party. Right where she'd smiled at neighbors and old friends and business associates, while knowing she'd planned to steal everything they were celebrating. The detective approached her gently. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Marlene looked at him, then at Bryce being led toward the door in handcuffs, then at Velma's cold, calculating face, then at the 40 witnesses who'd watched her get exposed on video discussing nursing homes and house sales and legal cover. Then she looked at me. One look. Maybe 5 seconds. Her eyes weren't angry, weren't defiant. They were empty. Like something inside her had finally broken under the weight of 18 months of lies, and now there was nothing left to hold the pieces together. I looked back at her standing on the walnut floor, where she'd taken her first steps 42 years ago, where Harriet had held her hands and walked her across the room, both of them laughing, where my daughter had grown up, loved and safe and trusted. The floor hadn't changed, but the person standing on it wasn't the daughter I'd raised. That daughter had disappeared somewhere in Velma's 8-year plan, replaced by someone who could discuss institutionalizing her father like it was a business transaction. The officer placed handcuffs on her wrists. Marlene didn't resist, didn't speak. Just let herself be led toward the door with Bryce and Velma. 3 people gone. 40 witnesses. One 11-year-old left standing. Lark sat in the corner chair where Velma had been earlier. She'd watched her father handcuffed, watched her grandmother arrested, watched her mother led away in handcuffs without saying a word, watched her entire family revealed as conspirators who'd spent 18 months trying to steal from the grandfather who'd loved her. I expected her to cry, to hide, to run from a room full of strangers who'd just witnessed her family's destruction. Instead, she stood up, 11 years old. Red eyes, but no tears falling. She walked to the center of the living room, where her mother had stood minutes before, looked at the 40 witnesses who'd recorded everything, and spoke clearly enough that every phone in the room would catch it. "My grandfather was never sick," she said. "Not loud, not dramatic, just true. I know because I lived with him, and I need everyone to know that." The room went absolutely silent. 40 people who'd just watched 3 arrests, suddenly watching something even more powerful, a child choosing truth over family loyalty, choosing integrity over the easier path of staying quiet. Lark walked over to me. I opened my arms and she stepped into them. 11 years old, brave beyond measure, holding on to her grandfather while her parents were being led out in handcuffs. Then Lester Graves stood up, retired federal judge, 30 years on the bench. He'd seen every kind of testimony, every form of courage, every variety of truth-telling. He started clapping. Slow, deliberate applause that filled the silent room. "Bravest thing I've seen in 30 years on the bench," he said to Lark. To everyone. To history. One by one, the other witnesses stood. Opal, Alvin, the neighbors, the old fishing buddies, the business associates, the people who'd come to celebrate my housewarming and stayed to witness justice. 40 people standing, applauding. Not for the arrests, not for the exposure. For an 11-year-old girl who'd chosen truth when truth cost everything. I held Lark close and looked up at the ceiling. The crown molding Harriet had chosen because it reminded her of her grandmother's house in Virginia. The ceiling she'd painted 3 times until she found exactly the right shade of cream. The light fixture we'd installed together while she stood on a ladder making jokes about my measuring skills. The applause wasn't for victory. It was for a child who chose truth when truth cost everything. "This house doesn't just have good bones," I said quietly to Lark, loud enough for her to hear. "It has a soul. Soul of the woman who built it with me." Harriet had built this house to be a home, a place where people told the truth, where integrity mattered more than convenience, where love was stronger than schemes. I held my granddaughter and looked at the ceiling. Harriet had chosen the floor, she'd walked the walls that held her laughter. This house had witnessed 18 months of betrayal. Now it would witness healing. Dawn came too soon, but I opened the boatyard at 5:30 anyway. The guests had left around midnight. Lark had fallen asleep in my arms during the last hour, exhausted from courage. Alvin drove her to his house where she'd stay until the custody hearing. Opal stayed to help me straighten chairs and collect forgotten wine glasses. By 1 a.m., the mansion was empty and silent, bearing witness to healing the way it had promised. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. So I drove to the boatyard in the dark and waited for the Savannah River to show itself in morning light. The unfinished skiff sat on sawhorses where I'd left it 18 months ago. Before the first doctor's appointment. Before the cognitive tests and the concern and the slow-building conspiracy. I'd been shaping the bow when Marlene called to suggest I see Dr. Crane, her voice heavy with worry I'd believed was real. I didn't touch the boat this morning. Just sat in the wooden chair Harriet had refinished 30 years ago and watched mist rise off the water. Counting what remained felt important. The boatyard, the mansion, my brother Alvin, Opal, who'd built the legal fortress that saved everything, Lark, who'd chosen truth, Lester, who'd validated her courage, Floyd and the other fishing buddies who'd stood as witnesses, and 14 messages on my phone from party guests checking in, offering support, asking what they could do. Not nothing. Not close to nothing. The river moved like it always had. Indifferent to human schemes. Present for healing the same way it had been present for betrayal. I watched a heron hunt the shallows and thought about the daughter who'd planned to institutionalize me so she could sell the house where she'd learned to walk. My phone rang at 6:15. Unknown number. Charleston area code. I almost didn't answer, but something in the timing felt deliberate. "Mr. Lockwood." A woman's voice. Older, trembling slightly. My name is Rebecca Hildreth. I'm the daughter of Thomas Hildreth, from Charleston, 8 years ago. The name landed like an anchor. Thomas Hildreth. The 79-year-old man Velma had targeted before she came after me. The victim whose brother had been an attorney who'd stopped the conspiracy, who'd been my friend. My father wanted me to call, she continued. He saw the news about Velma Travers getting arrested. He wanted to thank you. I watched the heron take flight. Wing beats steady and sure. I'm sorry I didn't see it 8 years ago, I said, when she came to me for help. When I gave her that money. If I'd known, you saw it when it mattered, Rebecca interrupted gently. You stopped her. My father said to tell you. Her voice broke, steadied. He said to tell you that stopping evil once is worth more than preventing it in imagination. You saved your family. You saved future families. Thank you. The call lasted 3 more minutes. She told me her father was 87 now, still sharp, still angry about what Velma had tried, still grateful to his brother who'd saved him, and now to the man who'd finally stopped her. When we hung up, I sat with my phone in my hand and cried for the first time since the arrests. Not for what I'd lost, for what I'd protected, for connections that reached across years and miles and connected victims who'd fought back. 7 days passed between that phone call and the envelope on Opal's desk. 7 days of sleeping in the mansion that was mine again. Of Lark video calling every evening from Alvin's house asking when she could come home. Of Floyd stopping by the boatyard with fresh grouper and stories that had nothing to do with fraud or betrayal. Of slowly remembering what normal felt like. Opal's Bull Street office hadn't changed since the day 18 months ago when she'd told me to start documenting everything. Same desk, same leather chairs, same window overlooking the oak trees that had witnessed 2 centuries of Savannah's history. She spread documents across the desk like evidence at trial. Bryce took a plea, she said. 6 counts of fraud plus conspiracy, 7 to 12 years. Velma refused to negotiate. She's going to trial on the conspiracy charges here, and Charleston reopened their case. She's looking at 15 to 20. I nodded, waited for the third name. Marlene cooperated with prosecutors, Opal continued carefully. Testified against Velma and Bryce, explained the timeline, the planning, the recruitment. Judge gave her suspended sentence, 3 years probation, restitution, community service. No jail time. Something in my chest tightened. Relief and anger and grief tangled together in ways I couldn't separate. The mansion's completely secure, Opal continued. The trust was never compromised. Everything you built, everything you protected, it's all exactly where it should be. The decoy accounts closed. Your actual assets never moved. The conspiracy failed at every level that mattered. She paused, reached into her desk drawer, pulled out a white envelope. Marlene asked me to give you this, she said quietly. Only if you wanted it. I told her I'd pass it along. What you do with it is your choice. The envelope lay on the desk between us. Plain. Sealed. My name written in Marlene's handwriting, the same careful cursive Harriet had taught her at this very desk when she was 7 years old. What do you say to the daughter who tried to steal everything you built? What words fit in an envelope after 18 months of betrayal, and 1 night of exposure, and a plea deal that traded testimony for freedom? I picked up the envelope, felt the weight of paper and ink and whatever explanation or apology or justification she'd written, slipped it into my jacket pocket without opening it. I'm not ready yet, I told Opal, but I will be, she nodded. Understanding written in her expression. She'd spent 18 months protecting me from legal destruction. She understood that emotional healing moved on a different timeline. Outside oak trees older than the conspiracy shaded Bull Street. The envelope sat in my pocket against my chest, sealed and silent. Whatever Marlene had written, whatever truth or excuse she'd put to paper, it would wait. I wasn't ready yet. But someday, when the healing had progressed far enough, when the anger had settled into something could hold without breaking, I'd open it. Not today. 2 weeks later, I finally opened the envelope. It had stayed in my jacket pocket through Lark's custody hearing, through visits to the boatyard, through quiet dinners where Alvin didn't ask questions. The envelope grew soft from handling. The seal weakened from humidity and warmth. I opened it alone in the study. Evening. October light slanting through windows Harriet had chosen for this angle this time of day. The letter inside was short. 1 page, handwriting shaky in places. "Dad," it began. Then 3 paragraphs that didn't ask for forgiveness because she knew she didn't deserve it. Just told me one thing. When I was 7 years old, you taught me to build model boats. You held my hands and showed me how to shape wood without forcing it. You said, "You're not making the boat. You're helping it become what it already is." That was the happiest day of my life. I chose the wrong person to trust, and I chose it at the wrong time. I'm sorry. No signature, no closing. Just those words and empty space where more should have been. I reached into the desk drawer, pulled out the letter I'd written the night before the party. The one I'd never sent. "Marlene, I know what you're planning. I've known for months. I'm giving you this one chance to walk away, to remember who you used to be. Please, choose differently." I'd sealed it, addressed it, then put it in the drawer because I knew she wouldn't choose differently. Knew the conspiracy had gone too far. 2 letters. 2 people who'd lost the ability to say what mattered until it was too late. I placed them side by side on the desk. Hers trying to explain what couldn't be explained. Mine trying to prevent what couldn't be prevented. We both wrote letters we couldn't send, I said to the empty room. I sat in the dark for an hour, thinking about forgiveness. Whether it was possible to forgive someone who'd spent 18 months trying to destroy you. Whether forgiveness required reconciliation, or if it could exist separately. "Forgiveness isn't a moment," I said finally. "Forgiveness is a decision you make every day. Forever." 1 week later, she asked the question I'd been avoiding since the arrests. Lark had been staying with me while her parents' legal proceedings moved forward. Judge granted me temporary custody. She slept in the guest room that used to be her mother's room. Ate breakfast at the same table. Living in the house her mother had tried to steal. We were sitting in the living room. Early evening. She was doing homework. I was reading case updates from Opal. Domestic quiet that felt both normal and surreal. Lark put down her pencil. Looked at me with those direct 11-year-old eyes. "Do you still love my mother?" she asked. I put down the papers. Thought about the question. About the 7-year-old who'd learned to build boats. About the 42-year-old who'd discussed nursing homes on hidden cameras. About the space between who someone was and who they became. "I love the mother you used to be," I said. "The one who built model boats and laughed at bad jokes and cried at dolphin documentaries. I don't know who the woman was that night. But yes, some part of me still loves some part of her." Lark nodded slowly. "Processing. Me too," she said quietly. "I love her. But I know what she did was wrong. I know she hurt you." She looked up. "But I'm still my mother's child. Can you both love your mother and know she's wrong?" 11 years old. Asking the question that adults spent lifetimes avoiding. "Yes," I said. "You can. It's hard, but you can." She went back to her homework. I went back to the case updates. Both of us carrying impossible questions that didn't have answers, only choices about how to carry them. 3 weeks after that conversation, I took her to the boatyard. Same workshop where I'd taught Marlene 35 years ago. Same tools. Same smell of sawdust and river water. I showed Lark how to hold the plane, how to read the grain, how to shape without forcing. "You're not making the boat," I told her using the same words. "You're helping it become what it already is." Lark was clumsy where Marlene had been precise. hesitant where her mother had been confident. But she was patient, focused, biting her lip in concentration the way Harriet used to. I watched her work and realized why I'd fought. Not for the mansion or the boatyard or the assets. For this. For the chance to stand in this workshop with this child and teach her what real love looked like. Imperfect, patient, present. The boat was crooked and rough. Just like forgiveness. Just like love. After 2 hours, Lark held up her first attempt. Wobbly hull, uneven deck, sail that leaned slightly wrong. She looked at it with pride that transcended craftsmanship. "Isn't it beautiful, Grandpa?" she asked. My throat tightened. I saw Marlene at 7 holding a similar boat. Saw Harriet teaching our daughter patience. Saw generations of love passed down through wood and water and hands that shaped without forcing. "Most beautiful I've ever seen," I said, and meant it. The tiny boat sat between us on the workbench, rough and imperfect, and full of promise. This was what I'd fought for. Not assets or houses, but the chance to teach one more generation what real love looked like. 3 months later, Opal gathered us in the mansion garden to announce what none of them had known. Lark's rough little boat sat on the mantel now next to the model Marlene had built at 7. 2 generations, 2 attempts at shaping wood without forcing it. Both imperfect, both exactly right. We assembled on the back terrace where Harriet had planted gardenias 30 years ago. November had given way to January. The kind of Georgia winter where you could still sit outside if you wore a jacket and didn't mind the bite in the air. Opal stood at the head of the table. Alvin sat beside me. Lester came because he'd been there for the arrests and wanted to be here for whatever came after. Lark sat on my other side, 11 years old, and still learning what custody hearings and probation meant. Before we discuss Lark's permanent placement, Opal began her attorney voice, carrying that particular weight that meant important news was coming. "There's something you all need to know. Something even Merle doesn't know yet." She pulled a folder from her briefcase. Legal documents, official seals, the kind of paperwork that changed what was possible. 3 years ago, she said, Harriet came to my office. She wanted to ensure this house would serve Savannah forever. We registered the mansion in the Harriet Lockwood Memorial Fund, a nonprofit educational trust dedicated to teaching traditional crafts to local children. The registration was completed and filed 2 months before Harriet passed away. She looked at me, then at the others. Under the trust's charter, the house cannot be sold, transferred, or mortgaged. After Merle's death, it becomes a learning center. The boatyard feeds into it. Savannah's children learn what Lark is learning now: how to shape wood, how to read water, how to build things that last. The words landed like that first arrest, changing everything by revealing what had always been true. 3 years ago, Lester said slowly, and I heard the lawyer in him working through the timeline. Before Marlene married Bryce, before Velma entered the picture, before any of them started planning. Exactly, Opal confirmed. The mansion was never available to steal. The guardianship petition, the competency evaluation, the forged documents, even if they'd succeeded, the house was protected. They fought 18 months for something that legally couldn't be taken. Alvin started laughing. Not cruel laughter. The kind that comes when irony and justice align so perfectly you can't help but appreciate the design. Harriet protected this house even after she was gone, I said quietly. Opal nodded. She knew what mattered. Not ownership. Legacy. She built this into the foundation 3 years before anyone threatened it. Perfect timing. Perfect protection. I thought about Velma's 8 years of planning. Marlene's 18 months of conspiracy. Bryce's careful documentation of every forgotten name. All that calculation and scheme and predatory intelligence aimed at something that had been placed beyond their reach before they even began. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about timing. About someone who loved you protecting what mattered most before the threat even appeared. That evening we walked to the riverbank where Harriet and I used to watch sunsets. Just Lark and me. The same dock where I'd taught her grandfather's knots 3 months ago. Where I'd shown her how boats move with water instead of fighting it. Where 50 years of boat building had taught me patience I'd needed when my own daughter tried to destroy me. We sat on the wooden bench I'd built in 1987. Lark's feet dangled above the dock, not quite reaching yet, growing every day, carrying forward something neither corruption nor conspiracy could touch. "Do you have any regrets, Grandpa?" she asked. I watched the Savannah River move past, indifferent to human drama, present for both betrayal and healing. "I regret not seeing it sooner," I said honestly. "Not realizing what Velma was, not saving your mother before she got too deep, being too busy with the boatyard to notice what my daughter needed." I paused. "I regret that you had to stand in that room and testify, that you had to choose between truth and family. No 11-year-old should carry that." Lark nodded, processing. Her hand found mine. "What don't you regret?" she asked. The sun was setting behind Savannah's skyline, January light painting the water gold and amber, and the particular shade of orange that only comes in winter. "I don't regret fighting," I said. "Don't regret trusting Opal when she said to document everything. Don't regret believing that justice was possible, even when it looked impossible. Don't regret keeping this house so children I'll never meet can learn what you're learning." I squeezed her hand. "And I don't regret every single day I get to teach you what real love looks like." The sun touched the water like forgiveness, slow, inevitable, complete. Lark rested her head on my shoulder. 11 years old. Brave beyond measure. Living proof that corruption could wound but not destroy what truly mattered. "Grandma Harriet was smart," she said, "protecting the house before anyone tried to take it. She was—" I agreed. But she wasn't protecting the house. She was protecting what happens inside it. The teaching, the learning, the passing down of something real. I looked at the river where 3 generations of Lockwoods had learned patience. At the boatyard, where Harriet had taught Marlene, where I'd taught Lark, where someday Lark would teach children whose names we didn't know yet. "Good houses aren't built of wood or stone," I said quietly. "They're built by people brave enough to stay no matter how many storms came. Your grandmother stayed through my stubborn years. I stayed through her illness. You stayed through your parents' betrayal. That's what makes a house worth protecting." The sun disappeared behind the skyline. Stars would come next. Then morning. Then another day of building something that would outlast all of us. Lark's head rested on my shoulder as darkness settled over the river. 72 years I'd built boats and houses and a life. This teaching one more generation to stay brave through storms, this was the only thing worth building. And to you listening to my story, remember this family. Betrayal cuts deeper than any other wound. But healing is possible if you're brave enough to fight for what's right. Looking back, I wish I'd seen the signs sooner. I was so busy building boats and running the boatyard that I missed what my daughter was becoming. Don't make my mistake when someone you love starts changing. Pay attention. Document everything. Trust your instincts when they tell you something's wrong, even if it's about family. The lesson I learned through this family drama, Revenge, isn't about winning or losing. It's about standing firm when everything tells you to give up. These family stories, Revenge, teach us that justice takes time, but it comes. I believe God's timing was perfect in this. He protected that house 3 years before I even knew I'd need protection. The real victory wasn't the arrests or the legal outcomes. It was teaching my granddaughter that truth matters more than comfort, and that real love means staying brave through storms. If this family drama revenge story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me your thoughts. Have you faced family betrayal? What would you have done differently? And if you want more family stories, revenge like this one, subscribe to Dad Family Revenge. Your support means everything. Thank you for staying until the very end. These family stories, revenge, are shared to help others learn and heal. This family drama revenge tale includes fictionalized elements for storytelling purposes, but the lessons about courage, justice, and choosing truth, those are real.